This week's show brought to you by Dre, giving Brian a raise for this amazing intro. Welcome back to another Boxscore Geeks show. I know this may surprise those of you that have been reading us diligently for years, but we are big Star Wars fans around here. We're big geeks, we're big nerds. On last week's Boxscore Geeks show, where Patrick was absent and EJ Fischer was in the comment section, I decided to give maybe 10 minutes of my thoughts on Star Wars The Force Awakens. And turns out that means we're going to talk way more of it because one of our guests, I'm going to ask you to give a shout out in a second here, EJ Fischer. You can find him on Twitter as Glorious Hubris, and you can find his amazing site, eugenefisher.com. EJ, our resident sci-fi author, knower of all things, science fiction and literature is here. EJ, say something cool.
I aspire to match your conception of me someday, Dre.
There we go. All right. And then, of course, the co-host of the show, who I rudely discussed Star Wars while you were away, Patrick, and now you have flown to Disney World to see all things Star Wars, I imagine. I imagine yes. Disney World is now Star Wars World now.
The Empire will strike back.
Exactly. So NBA geek, Patrick Minton, who, you just gave your shout out there. And as always, the show is produced by our amazing producer, Brian Foster. Brian, you get a raise for that intro there. So just giving you a heads up, we're going to talk Star Wars. We're going to talk a few controversial things I brought up on last week's show about literary tropes, etc. But this is just going to be hour and a half of three geeks, three nerds, whatever, talking Star Wars. And then, as I said, the background is EJ Fischer is a sci-fi author. You're still getting amazing praise for The New Mother, right?
I mean, I could stand some more.
All right, so if you're listening to this, help out EJ's ego. More praise for The New Mother, and there's a great
buy it. Go buy it.
You don't have to buy it anymore. You can view it online. I've put it up online.
There you go.
But it's better if they buy it, right? Because then they can get it to the reader.
It's kind of hard to buy it now, given that it was published in a magazine, and then further issues come out. I put it up online because it's difficult to buy now. Not impossible.
Package it up and put it on Amazon for some nominal fee?
It's been long enough that I probably could, but at this point, I've been paid for it. I'm just interested in people reading it now. I'm just interested in
I've read several books that were free, but that I paid for, and what I was paying for was essentially the service of some poor schmuck who had to put it together in some form of ebook form for my Kindle, because I'd rather do that than read it on a webpage or something like that. Right?
This is actually the actual fully honest answer to your question is a not really topic relevant rant about not wanting to be in Amazon's walled garden and the relationship between Amazon and there's like a modification of literature. But
all right, as mentioned, this was a Star Wars podcast, but there's a great two-part podcast where I talk all things The New Mother with EJ. So you should go read it, listen to that, and give him more praise on Twitter. So there you go. And if you want to send him money, send him money too. All right. So anyway, that's one reason you're on the show, and also you were in the comments section last week. Let's get started with a topic we've already kind of discussed a little. I don't think it's that controversial. You had a great post, EJ, called the J.J. Abrams franchise model. And what everybody's pointing out is The Force Awakens, love it, hate it, whatever, wherever you stand in between. For the record, it's made over $1 billion already, so most people seem to like it. J.J. Abrams basically took Star Wars, redid the entire movie just like Star Wars, maybe made some characters a little more perfect than the original one. We'll talk that in a bit. Plugged in a more diverse cast, bless him for that, and then made $1 billion. So you wrote a piece on that. I'm going to let you spiel a little bit about this model of just, the very formulaic model J.J. Abrams took, and then we can get into our thoughts on it.
Well, first off, I'd say it's a humor piece. I'm being kind of tongue-in-cheek here. But whenever J.J. Abrams gets his hands on a franchise movie, and what I'm thinking of here are the two Star Trek movies that have come out recently, and then Star Wars: The Force Awakens, they're basically, it's homages plus twists. It's sort of a really simple, like, let's be as visually faithful to the source material that we have before, and try to figure out, what things about this property made it cult in the first place, and retain all of that, and then do just sort of to develop interest in this new property, do really simple like twists on character relationships. Like, let's turn the subordinate into the boss, like, reversing the power relationship between Spock and Kirk in the first Star Trek movie, or let's do exactly the same thing before, but bigger, like the antagonist spaceship in Star Trek Into Darkness, or the Starkiller base.
Did you love, to your point on that, did you love that there was a scene in the movie where he's like, this is a hologram of the original Death Star. This is a hologram, I don't even remember what it's called, of the super mega bajillion Death Star. And so there is a visual scene where it's just like, just to show you how much bigger I mean, here's how much bigger I mean.
Right, yeah. The same but bigger is an important part of this particular recipe. What's more interesting to me, like, one of the things I had in that humor piece, like, honor the past by casting, by using the original actors wherever possible, honor the future by having otherwise diverse casting, and honor the fans by making sure that any newly introduced characters are definitely as completely obsessed with the old favorites as, everyone sitting in the chairs are. But I thinking about that more since I thought that. By far, my favorite thing about Star Wars: The Force Awakens was that, it's marching towards being the most successful film ever. If it isn't already the most successful film ever, I've stopped keeping up. And it stars a woman and a black man in, a Hollywood system where for years people said that movies, starring women or minorities didn't sell. Well, that argument is no longer possible, which is the best thing about Star Wars. But I wonder whether or not he would have done that if he hadn't gotten so roundly criticized for whitewashing the character of Khan in Star Wars Into Darkness, or Star Trek Into Darkness. Because that was a big deal. People were really angry that they'd taken a character that had been played by a minority in Wrath of Khan, and he cast Benedict Cumberbatch.
How dare they cast a white person to play a role that is destined for a Colombian man imitating an Asian?
Well, I think so. By the way, I actually got to give an apology to J.J. Abrams. So on last week's show, I speculated, this was one of the topics we discussed. We talk like action figures. So, I mean, obviously one of the biggest drivers behind why Disney paid so much money for Star Wars is merchandising. Throwback to Spaceballs. But there's been a lot of flack lately to the lack of Rey action figures, Rey in the Monopoly game, all this stuff. And the claims that the producers made was we didn't want spoilers. And so when I heard that, I immediately jumped on Abrams. Last week's show, I speculated that Abrams was trying to keep everything under wraps and was trying to keep the fact that Rey was essentially Luke Skywalker. I'd argue actually I liked her better than Luke Skywalker.
Finn in the set?
What?
Finn is in the set.
Finn is in the set. Well, I mean, that's true.
I call bullshit. It's not about
it's complete bullshit, but this is where I want to give the apologies. I speculated this was Abrams doing, because if you recall, we were talking Star Trek. When he took over Star Trek, whatever the second one was called, Star Trek, Everything
Into
is
Darkness.
Stupid. Into Darkness. Yeah. Wow.
That would have been a better title. Star Trek, Everything is Stupid.
Everybody said, oh, he's going to bring back Khan. Of course he's going to bring back Khan. He's like, I'm not bringing back Khan. I'm not bringing back Khan. I'm telling you I'm not bringing back Khan. Stop speculating that I'm bringing back Khan. And then in a role, I haven't seen the movie, by the way, I apologize, but I've read spoilers and stuff. But as far as I can tell, Benedict Cumberbatch's character goes, ha, I'm Khan. And it means nothing. In the realm of the story.
It's absolutely nothing, yeah.
So the fact that Abrams went out of his way to so vehemently say no spoilers, no Khan, and it was like, ha, Khan, I was like, that's the stupidest thing ever. So I was under the assumption he was using the same dumb mindset. He has come out and said the same thing where he said, I didn't tell anybody not to use Rey. I think it's a really stupid thing. Obviously, she should be in. So I want to apologize to J.J. Abrams there.
And speaking of learning lessons, he's gone on record and saying, yeah, that thing we did with saying it wasn't Khan when it was Khan turned out to be a really stupid move. Bad call on us. So
yeah, so I mean, I guess just
the man is educable.
But I mean, I think we were kind of having this back and forth, which was kind of interesting. So Patrick, I'm curious your thoughts here, because we were talking pre-show about this, about the enjoyment level of the movie. I think something important, I'll sell you out immediately, EJ, as you said, you think Star Wars, like as a whole, the franchise, like the good ones that everybody accepts are good, Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back, you like them, but as a whole, you're not the biggest Star Wars fan. Whereas Patrick and me were saying, like, our childhoods, obviously, we just love Star Wars. So, Patrick, I'm curious about your enjoyment level of this movie, given, as we're saying, the rehashedness, all of this other stuff. Are you able to enjoy it, given the fact that it is just a remake?
I enjoyed it a lot. I've now seen it 3 times in the theater, although the first 2 times were kind of accidental because I had tickets, and then my company took me to a showing, and I was like, well, I'm not going to go to work, so I guess I'll go see it a second time. Um, and the third time was just recently because my fiance was running a marathon, so she had to go to sleep at 7 p.m. And I'm like, what am I going to do? I'm in Disney World. I'm alone. I don't want to ride rides alone. I guess I'll go see Star Wars: The Force Awakens again. So it's not like I've seen it 3 times because I think it's the greatest thing ever, but I have seen it 3 times and I have liked it all 3 times. I actually really liked the first Abrams Star Trek and hated the second Abrams Star Trek too, to touch on that point. But the thing about it is I liked it a lot, and I actually really liked all of the sort of callbacks to the first trilogy, or really to Episode 4, with the exception of the whole Starkiller base plotline, which was such a painful callback that so most of the other callbacks are subtle, or not. They're not really subtle, but they don't get in the way of the story, right? So Rey is like is a scavenger on a desert planet. She's a very similar figure to Luke, and Kylo Ren is obviously a very similar figure to Darth Vader, etc. And all those callbacks are fine because they're really just hitting the sort of tropes that you expect in a Campbellian myth type story, in a Flash Gordon type story, right? And none of that distracts me. But the whole Starkiller base thing, and the whole let's blow up a big station by triggering a chain reaction from one tiny portion of it, that part was so carbon copied from the original that it really just distracted me. The first time I saw The Force Awakens, from like that plot point on, I just sat there in the theater unbelievingly just thinking, I really can't believe they're doing the let's blow up the Death Star by triggering a chain reaction storyline again in this movie. Because it's completely not necessary. People bitched about it in Return of the Jedi. People bitched about it in Phantom of the Menace. That was exactly the one
Phantom of the Menace, I
you did
like
not
that
need
one.
to resurrect for this movie. So it was so distracting. But otherwise, I really liked the movie.
No thoughts, EJ, on the blowing up the Death Star. I'm curious your thoughts there, because even for me, like I'm in the same boat you are, Patrick. I did the exact same thing. That plot.
Again, I don't think here's sort of, this is not a perfectly formed metaphor yet, but here's the direction my thoughts are going in on why I think Star Wars is a stronger movie than The Force Awakens. And in some other thing I wrote, I said that like The Force Awakens is like a cover album made by worse talent with much, much better recording equipment. And so Star Wars, like Patrick was sort of referencing that there are archetypical elements that go into Star Wars, which is now sort of like it's almost cliche to say, like, do you know about like the Joseph Campbell connection, or the relation to the Hidden Fortress, and seeing the eyes of the grand story through like these two lowly characters, and it's true. The lot of Star Wars came from, like, Star Wars is a mix of both deeply imaginative visuals, and narrative elements that are taken from other places, but that this sort of curatorial artistry is actually very common and not something that like we generally criticize. Like, Kill Bill, people have commented as being sort of a best of, like, a 4-hour best of clip show of some decades of Hong Kong action films.
And I've heard a comment about oh, I just dropped his name. How am I dropping director's name? Help me out here. Pulp Fiction.
Quentin
Tarantino. Oh my God. But Tarantino, I've heard one of the things he has is like he worked in a video store, and he just has this apparently like amazing recall memory. He watches movies and just picks out the favorite things he likes and is able to kind of edit them together in movies he likes. And you can call that.
Yeah. I don't think that Tarantino would in any way disagree with EJ's description of Kill Bill there at all. In fact, I think that was explicitly his goal.
And I
was
don't
to make
think
a
that
4-hour best of hits.
makes it a bad movie. I think that there is legitimate artistry in these sort of acts of narrative curation, and curation is not, you know, is not anathema to creation. Like there's initial there's new things, there are new storytelling tropes, there are new like one of the greatest things that Star Wars did was that like it added in many ways to sort of the visual vocabulary of science fiction cinema. Um, and like that's on Lucas. That didn't come from Joseph Campbell.
Yeah.
So it's like, if I am going to a museum with, amazing sort of works of art and installations illustrating, I don't know, geography and numismatics and whatever else you want to have that is going to be of interest to me. I don't criticize the curator of that museum for not having created those things. I thank them for, bringing them together in a place and in a way that, entertained and,
Can I
captivated
suggest
me.
perhaps a better metaphor,
Sure.
which is like, so I always think of the blues as a musician, right? So to suggest that, for example, B.B. King wasn't a very great musician because all he did was copy the 1-4-5 blues progression chord that that artists before him had already done would be crazy, right? To suggest that B.B. King didn't introduce any new elements to the blues just because he was following the same pattern that people came before him did would be crazy. The same with, Eric Clapton or Stevie Ray Vaughan, or name any other blues artist you think is amazing. Each of them did a bunch of things, a whole bunch of things, like maybe 80, maybe even 90% of the songs they wrote were following patterns that artists before them had already well established. But that doesn't mean that that extra 10% they did was meaninless, that it didn't add anything to the art form. And I think, and you could say that about blues, but you could also say that about, swing music or about rap or all kinds of other types of music, that when you sit down to write a new rap song, you're not just going to start from scratch. You're doing things that Grandmaster Flash did, and that Biggie did, and that Tupac did, and all these other things. They're influencing you, and you're going to repeat many of the patterns that they did. But that doesn't mean that when Kanye brings out a new song, that there's nothing new that he added. Just because he's standing on the shoulders of giants, and just because he's doing many of the same things that those giants did, doesn't mean that his art is somehow diminished, is somehow not fresh and not new.
And
I agree with you that Lucas brought something new to it, even though he was doing things. I guess what we're both trying to say, I think, is that you can make formulaic pieces of work that are still works of art.
I mean, I'm actually saying something larger than that. I don't think that Star Wars. I wouldn't describe the original Star Wars as necessarily formulaic. I it's become such a part of a culture that it's difficult to imagine not knowing what happens beat by beat in Star Wars now. But I don't think people in those seats were like, by the time Luke was leaving Tatooine, saying like, "Oh, they're going to end up blowing up a Death Star." Like, I don't think they were predicting what was going to happen. But I
think they were predicting the happy ending, though, right? The triumph of
you're not a genius for predicting a happy ending in an action movie.
No, but that's what we're both saying, right? Is it's following a trope, and just because you can predict that trope doesn't like negate the.
We'll talk more about tropes later.
I'm gonna get us into tropes soon, so yeah, I'll let you finish this thought up.
There's a difference between what Lucas did and what J.J. Abrams has done, which is this sort of like this the artist as curator sense, where we're praising Lucas, and in your metaphor, which is not as accessible to me because I'm not as big a fan of the blues, but I perfectly buy like B.B. King, like taking the work of all of these other artists and finding ways to reuse it in to create something that we haven't seen before, in the sort of there's nothing new under the sun and yet creative work is still possible kind of way. Lucas was working from many sources, and J.J. Abrams was largely working from one source. And it feels like a sort of different artistic project to me in that regard. Like, having so much of the movie be homage to this one particular previous movie makes it feel like a different, even though the movies themselves, in terms of what you see on the screen, is so similar, the creative projects behind the original Star Wars movie and Star Wars The Force Awakens feel very different to me.
So I want to wrap this up on one thing, which is to say, I actually 100% agree. So what we're kind of saying is both these people are, as artists, and many directors do this, curate, take stuff they like, and Lucas's case, he's like taking Flash Gordon, Joseph Campbell. I don't know wherever he got star swords from or light swords, which he did take. He put that all together and that turned into Star Wars. Whereas J.J. Abrams basically said, I'm going to take Star Wars, but I'm going to update it. And then what I'm going to basically do, and this is, I'm hugely behind this. He said, I'm going to put a woman and two minorities as the main roles that were previously played by, a white cast and a dog, a giant dog. My wife, by the way, loved Chewbacca. I noticed that is my theory on the prequels. The prequels did not have enough Chewbacca because even if someone doesn't like Star Wars, that's what my wife said to me when we went. She's like, I'm not a biggest Star Wars fan, but we went and saw. She lit up every time Chewbacca was on screen. So please, next director. By the way, this is a spoiler-filled podcast. Obviously, you can take Han Solo, but you're not allowed to take Chewbacca. But what I'm going to say is one thing I liked is he basically did do Star Wars very formulaically, but just inserted essentially women and minorities into different roles that they're not normally cast in. And I'm hugely behind that because one thing we notice in media is when movies that star women and minorities fail, usually those get the blame, even though typically movies like that get built have so many different moving parts that they're trying to do differently, that's the one variable that gets pointed out by Hollywood and everything else gets ignored. And so obviously that didn't happen here. So I actually kind of think that from a weird scientific perspective as a science experiment of saying, look, I'm going to keep everything else the same and I'm just going to change women and minorities. And if that doesn't lose us $1 billion, then we can just, like, as you pointed at the very beginning, EJ, we can end that argument. So you had said that at the very beginning. I'm just repeating what you said at the beginning of the show.
It's the best thing about the movie and it's not even close.
All right, so I actually want to get us into some controversy because we've been really nice to each other and piling on each other's metaphors, and that's nice. I want to get us into the fight that started this show. So last week's show, I gave a call out to two people, and we're going to talk both of these film critics. I called out Max Landis and Anita Sarkeesian. Now, Max Landis, I feel for the dude because as someone who occasionally just gets people mad at me over Kobe, this is a guy that just sparks controversy on Twitter. And what he did is he called Rey a Mary Sue. And that's the discussion I want to get us into. Let's see. EJ, you talked last. Patrick, you had some great sound bites. I'll be despondent if you're not even half as good as you were in the pre-show. I want to hear you go on Max Landis and Mary Sue here.
So I believe I'm going to give credit to EJ for this because if you aren't trying to be sexist, you don't use the word Mary Sue in the first place. I think it's kind of ridiculous that there's supposedly a Gary Stu sort of male counterpart to Mary Sue, except that nobody ever uses it in any analysis of any work of fiction. So this seems to be a term that is pretty solely reserved for being sexist. And my big thing about this is that it's piled on top of a bunch of suppositions. The first supposition is that she's had no training in the Force, so how could she dive in and be so amazing in the Force? But one of the central sort of mysteries of the film, there are like two big mysteries of the film, and one of those mysteries is who the hell is Rey and what happened to her in the 20x years before The Force Awakens started? So how do we know she didn't have any training in the Force? And by the way, in a little tiny sort of shout out here, if you read the novelization, there's tons of hints that she did in fact have all kinds of Force training before this. And there's a moment in the book, for example, in that scene where Kylo Ren is trying to suck the knowledge of the map out of her head. In the novelization, they have the advantage of like inner monologue. So there's this sort of talk of how Kylo Ren accidentally broke some wall that was like walling off her memories. So it's very possible that she had all kinds of Force training as a youth. We don't know. And it seems bizarre to me that there's all these mysteries around Rey. Who is she? Who's her mysterious family that never comes back to her? And when we're talking about her being a Mary Sue, nobody ever speculates, oh, well, maybe part of the mystery is why is she so good at all these things in Star Wars? Another thing is that some of the things she's good at aren't really that remarkable in the Star Wars universe. So, for example, she can speak like N languages, and I don't know what the number N is, but all I know is that in Star Wars, there are tons of characters that can speak tons of languages. Han Solo speaks like 8 languages as far as I've counted so far. It's actually extremely common to be multilingual in the Star Wars universe, so that's not really a big deal. And then, of course, there's the fact that she can pilot a bunch of aircraft, which also doesn't seem to be like a very remarkable skill in the Star Wars universe, because you've got like Anakin Skywalker, who seemed to go at like the age of 8 or whatever he is. He went from driving little speed podsters things to driving like an airplane that
I'm
blew up
loving this. I'm
yet
loving
another
this
Death Star.
monologue, Patrick. I am going to just say, like, as a judge flag, if you're going to try and use the prequels as precedent to say something is good, I'm just giving you a warning ahead of time that may not be the best
We're not talking about good or bad. We're not talking about good or bad here. We're just talking about the precedence of whether somebody is uber confident or too competent. And finally, science fiction is essentially largely competence porn, right? That's what science fiction is. There are so many characters in science fiction that are like amazing from the get-go. You know, Batman and Clark Kent and Luke Skywalker.
Oh
And
my God, it's taking
right?
everything I have not to shout you down as you give this definition of science fiction.
Okay, we'll let you. I want to hear you go off too, EJ. So we'll let you go in just a sec. So Patrick, finish up, and then EJ, you're gonna come
I'm
out.
not at all suggesting that all science fiction is like that. I am saying though that science fiction is full of characters like that, and somehow we never get upset about it, unless of course it's a female, and then it must be a Mary Sue. And again, I'll reiterate that the fact that you're using the term Mary Sue is already in essence being sexist, right? I mean, it the origin of it, it's like the fact that you're using this sort of archetypical sort of 2-word description of the character instead of saying, well, I don't like that this character is good at everything, right? You're not saying that. You're saying she's a Mary Sue. So you're literally putting a sexist label on it.
And what's funny too, I actually want to. You're swaying me, Patrick. I'm actually kind of upset because pre-show we were a little more, and actually that was really good. EJ, I'm going to let you go in just a sec. So I want to see if maybe you get me back to the dark side. But what I'd say is, like, even Batman, when he gets a definition right, where it's like, oh, he's trained all over the world. I mean, that's the Malcolm Gladwell trope, right, of the 10,000 hours. It's like this belief that this guy, by the time he's 25, is somehow the best martial artist because he went to the top of a mountain, and the best detective because he studied at the CIA for a few years or months. Actually, I think is the canon. I forget. I've got a Batman book somewhere that has the origin story that somehow yes,
Don't forget
the real
billionaire
version
scientist.
of Batman in that book. What
Which one?
Batman really did.
Which one?
That book will tell you what Batman really did. That'll settle it.
Oh, all right. Thank you. All right. Way to mock me there, little EJ. But yeah, I mean, basically, there's this notion that, well, we get a reason in those books why, and to claim not a Mary Sue. But to your point, Patrick, anybody with any logic is like, we know this from stats. We get into fights all the time online. I'll bring this back to basketball briefly and then go on. Like, we get with fights online all the time with people about why their stats are bad or why their studies are bad and all this stuff. And they get so offended. It's like, to do real statistical research and analysis takes a lot of time and work. You and I have put hours and hours of code and analysis and math into knowing these things. So it gets very offensive when we meet someone who's like, well, I talked to this guy and spent 10 minutes. So to the Batman point, I agree. Like, you could argue the same Mary Sue point, which is, yeah, Ray gets very little explanation. These other characters get an explanation. They're both BS. Okay, EJ, I want to hear you jump in. Sci-fi, defend your honor of your your writing
well,
style.
What I actually said pre-show, although I agree with Patrick that like Mary Sue has a sexist connotation. What I actually said pre-show is if you're using the term Mary Sue, you're already not having a literary conversation.
Which is, and I will say, just to jump in one more time, so I know I've been hogging the mic, that is arguably, that's been Max's one, if you listen to any of Max Landis's interviews, it's Up to My Knees on YouTube. We'll include the links in the show notes. The guy who used the original Mary Sue, that has been one of his like hills he's dying on, which is saying this was a literary definition and a little literary argument he's making. So I definitely want to hear your response to that.
And it's not. So, I mean, my background, for those people who don't know, is I write science fiction. I used to teach science fiction writing at the University of Iowa. And this, this sort of notion of like, what is the role of trope and in story is one that I feel I've sort of done my version of the putting in, the hours and hours of code and math to understand the stats that you were just talking about, Trey. Like, this is something that, I've studied academically. And so Mary Sue, where the term Mary Sue comes from, it comes from Star Trek fan fiction, back when fan fiction wasn't a thing that was online, but was like, in fanzines. And it came from a character named Mary Sue that was an authorial insertion character. Like, I love Kirk and I love Spock and I want to pal around with them and save the day. And I understand the virtue of like saying, oh, it's a Mary Sue. Like, if there were like a film director doing a documentary on the ecology of the desert, who was instrumental in one scene in Rey and Finn escaping from the First Order, and wore glasses just like J.J. Abrams' glasses, I'd be like, oh, okay, I have no problem with you calling that character a Mary Stu or Gary Stu if we need to gender everything. But it seems to have in these arguments, and I'm not previously familiar with Max Landis, but I've seen these arguments, for years on the internet. It seems to basically mean character that is competent beyond my level to invest in the story is sort of the definition that it's adapted, which is taking sort of an aesthetic taste stance, but it's taking a stance of aesthetic taste, and it's dressing it up in the clothes of, analysis. It's like saying, no, I'm making an analytical judgment that this passes the objective threshold for Mary Sue Dumb. And it's just a really, really boring kind of facile argumentation that, something like TV Tropes, which is a website I really strongly dislike, facilitates.
Interesting. Well, I think I can see your point. I enjoy the site, but I think you're saying you dislike it because of what it breeds, and I'll jump in with more on that in a second.
I'm saying that there are all these things. Like, tropes are a thing that exist, but TV Tropes is sort of just to be able to talk about this with some degree of knowledge. I clicked through to the Mary Sue page from the show notes on TV Tropes, and then just clicked a few random internal reference articles, and there were things like the broken pillar for the character who is worshipped by the other characters but then suffers a fatal flaw and is no longer worshipped, and then compared to the repaired pillar where then that character becomes these are not tropes. What this is a game where you're trying to isolate every sort of element of story and anything you've liked and apply a label to it, give it a name, invent a language, so that you can say, this is the Mary Sue, and then the broken pillar, and then the repaired pillar, and then this, and then that, and have fun playing a sort of game of bingo with narrative, which is, if you enjoy that, I'm sure is a fun way to pass the time, but is not the same thing as analyzing a story for its own artistic goals and how the elements therein function. It's not analysis, it's labeling.
Oh my, it's so funny because you started this saying you've put in the hours and code, basically literary, and obviously we've done the stats. I listen to all of the podcasts we do back at least one or two times just to hear what we say and type up the notes. You sound just like me when I start talking like the advanced stats community and how despondent I am because so many people do what you're saying. They go to Excel and they run a simple regression and they print out a simple chart and they say that's analysis. And I go, that's not analysis. That's cut and paste. That's cutting and pasting numbers and thinking you're doing analysis and tricking yourself. And so, sorry, to follow up on your tropes point, I always mention the Cracked podcast. This week, they have a great one that follows up, and they discuss things like the Manic Pixie Dream Girl. And they said that the original author of the Manic Pixie Dream Girl, another one of these tropes that tends to be used in a very sexist manner. If you're a female character in a movie, it is perfectly fine to point out the flaws in female characterization in movies, because there are tons of them, right? There's damsels in distress, etc. But it gets difficult when you remove anything unique or good about that character and just put a label on them and say, this character's a Mary Sue, because right. you could argue that the character in the Zach Braff movie, I'm just forgetting names all over the place today, but there's a Zach Braff movie where Natalie Portman is labeled a Manic Pixie Dream Girl, which is fine. She fits the line, I guess, but she does have a character. She does put on a great performance. So it's very diminutive to both Natalie Portman and that character to just remove everything else. And I think that's the problem we've been having with Mary Sue.
What this labeling does is it gives you, it's like a rhetorical veil to hide behind. It's taking what is fundamentally a subjective aesthetic preference, dressing it up as analysis, and thereby giving you permission to be dismissive of others on the basis of your subjective aesthetic analysis.
I'm gonna have to listen to that again and write that down, because I think that is how tropes are used a lot, where people do that. So I've got one question, and I'll let you go on this one, Patrick. One other point that Anita Sarkeesian, on her review of this, brought up that I thought was interesting, and I think is actually far more interesting than Rey from a character perspective, is Finn's a great character. I love Finn, mostly.
Disagree.
But, okay. I think we're actually going to agree here. So let's actually be careful here. So sorry to have to take a step back immediately, Jay. I think
Fine.
that Star Wars and The Force Awakens have some great characters that aren't super great from a big standpoint, from a narrative standpoint, from their backstory, whatever, but you just enjoy them. And I would argue Finn falls into this where the point Anita brought up is Finn is supposed to be a raised from birth, essentially Nazi foot soldier that has a crisis of faith in his first major battle and then runs away, which is a great start to a story. And then not 2 scenes later, we see him picking up a lightsaber and chopping down fellow stormtroopers, which means we were fed, oh, this character has a real crisis of faith about killing in his place in the universe. And 2 scenes later, he's like, kill away now that I'm on the good side. And she brought that up. And I haven't seen that get as much play, as Rey even. And I actually, from a narrative standpoint in the Star Wars movies, find that a bigger problem. I'm curious, Patrick, I'll let you jump in on that.
It's a real good point, I think. Patrick?
I don't know how much I want to talk about so to me, the only logical explanation for this, right, is that Rey was programmed from birth to be some killer, but as he mentioned in one point of dialogue, in his first battle, he couldn't do it. And
Finn,
there's
right.
So he implies that he's never actually killed anybody up until that point, right? And in his first battle, he couldn't do it, right? And the only explanation I can have is that I have for this, and it may be trite, and I'm totally fine with that explanation, is that in that battle, there's some kind of a dam that snaps, and when that snaps, all of his conditioning falls away, and the true Finn just sort of emerges, right? And I completely agree that that's trite and kind of crazy, but it's really the only explanation we have for this character.
In the model you're
by the way,
proposing,
I would caution here that I honestly think that the storytellers want to tell more stories about Finn and about his history, his backstory, what happened, his character, etc. And I think there's more story they want to tell there. And you may or may not have huge problems with where that story is going, but we should wait and hear what those stories are before we jump to crazy conclusions. The one thing I will say about characterization in The Force Awakens, and this is, I think, one of the areas where EJ and I are going to disagree a lot. I think so George Lucas brought like this visual stuff to the Star Wars universe, but what George Lucas was never very good at was sort of dialogue and sort of small character interactions. And I think that that's what Abrams is actually really good at. I don't think he's good at this like sort of plotting and telling great innovative stories, but I think he's actually really good at this small sort of character interaction stuff.
J.J. Abrams has the capacity to be charming, which George Lucas never did. I completely agree with you on that.
I don't know that it's just that. So here's an example. Like, I think, for example, there isn't a lot of exposition in The Force Awakens about the characters. They don't waste time telling you who they are and who they want to be, etc. But there's little tiny moments that give you, I think cinematically are really great and give you insight into the character. So one example is there's a scene at the beginning of Rey's first, like, sort of longer scene where she gets in a camp with the stuff she just looted from that old Star Destroyer, and she's sitting there and she's like washing a thing, and she kind of looks up and she sees this old crone aside from her, and you can literally see this just flashing, like, there's no dialogue, but you can see what's happening here is she's looking at this person and thinking like, man, I don't want to grow old and fucking die on this planet where all I'm doing is washing shit off of a Star Destroyer. And then it's like 5 seconds long, and then a person comes along and shakes her out of her memory. And then later, there's the scene where she rescues BB-8, and she doesn't like waste time telling everybody how noble she is. She just rescues BB-8 and then just immediately starts talking to BB-8 like BB-8's a person and not a droid. And you instantly understand that Rey is this sort of sympathetic person who treats everyone as equal and doesn't look down at inferior beings. You just understand that about her character because of this. There's this thing like where Rey.
EJ, I'm gonna let you jump in because you've been raring to go.
Okay, you want to?
I just want to comment, like, these examples you're giving. Like, I don't disagree with anything you're saying. I think he's like, yes, early in the movie, Rey encounters a very clear visual objective correlative for her own potential future, and which she then doesn't follow. Yes, she encounters a character and isn't instantly a dick to it, thereby indicating that she default stance isn't being. This is not like yes, these are all perfectly. J.J. Abrams is a talented movie maker, and these are all tools of cinematic storytelling. They're not like the Large Hadron Collider of narrative tinkering. We're not like.
The thing I would say to
I
that
would never
is,
argue
how
that it's a
come,
badly
if
made
this
movie.
rule is
I
so
think all
simple,
the
how come
things
so
you're
many
saying are kind of
filmmakers violate it all the time? How many terrible movies do you see every year where the filmmaker violates these very things we're just talking about? Like, these simple rules are not followed very often or very well.
well,
There's so many movies where
not
it boils down
terrible
to the
is
narrative.
not the bar I want the
Talking
movie to
about,
clear.
what we're talking about is the simple thing that the first thing you learned as a writer was show, don't tell, right? How many books a year do you read where you're thinking to yourself, God damn it, I wish this writer would stop telling me and start showing me? It happens all the time.
Very few, because I specifically don't read those books. Because
Well,
I'm not judging.
that's
I'm not
fine.
judging
What you're
books I
basically saying
read.
is you only read good books, and that's fine. But that's not the same as saying, well, it's really easy to write good books, because I don't think that's
I
true.
wouldn't say that. I never said it was easy. I said J.J. Abrams is a really talented filmmaker. What I'm saying, like Sturgeon's Law, 90% of everything is shit. Almost every movie that is ever made is not worth seeing. And
Well,
in
then
the
we have to
remaining
give Abrams
10% that
credit for
are
being
worth
in the
seeing,
91st percentile, then, right?
Yeah, keep
in
going,
the
EJ.
remaining 10% that are worth seeing, they don't get a pass just by not being shit.
I think it's better than not shit.
I think it's better
I
than
think
not shit too. I just think that you're setting, like, the examples you're giving are setting a really, really low bar.
Interesting.
Oh, but it's because I think of this as, so this is what Abrams is bringing to Star Wars. This is what Josh Whedon brought to the Marvel universe. This is, I mean, this is kind of what Abrams brought to the first Star Trek movie. This is like, it seems like a simple thing, but you don't see it in any Michael Bay movie that makes billions of dollars. You just don't see it very often at
Well, I mean,
all. And to
let's
me,
first
it's one of those
separate let's
stories.
first separate like artistic virtue versus like economic success. They're orthogonal. They're not
But the,
really.
the, the very point I'm making is that the overlap, or they aren't mutually exclusive, and I don't think that these little things that Josh Whedon did that made the Avengers so popular are trivial and had no economic value, and I don't think the things that Abrams brought to the Force Awakens are trivial and had no economic value. And my exact counterexample is all of the prequels, which had none of that. The prequels had none of that, and that's why everybody
And
hated.
made huge amounts of money, by the way.
Yeah, but universally they're reviled, and none of them made anywhere near as much money as The Force Awakens. Even though, if you look at it objectively, given when they came out and given how hungry all the Star Wars fans were for Star Wars stuff, there's no reason they should have.
No,
Like
I
the
would
Phantom
argue that
Menace,
Star
the
Wars fans
Phantom
are
Menace
more
should have
hungry.
made twice as much as The Force Awakens is making now. Like,
I would
everyone was
argue that the
so
prequels
fucking
made fans
hungry.
more hungry.
This is I'm gonna give
Like,
a ref
how many
flag, because the
people?
problem is we don't actually have monologues, which is easy to go back and forth. So I'll just give the yellow card ref flag, Patrick, because you're going on, and that's awesome. Is just let EJ add briefly, because this is this is actually a conversation I want to listen to, because I don't have anything to add, and you're both saying good stuff. So I'll say that is like, let
I would
EJ go a
argue
little more. That's the one thing to say. But yeah, this is interesting back and forth. I The economic success versus artistic merit comment you're both making is really odd. I guess my question to you, EJ, because this is what I'm curious
Mhm.
on, is on the whole, do you agree that Abrams helped the Star Wars franchise or hurt it? And what are the things that you think he left out if there was other stuff he could have done?
So I disagree with Patrick that it would make sense for Phantom Menace to have been a bigger movie than Star Wars. I think that the fans are much hungrier because they felt like they got three movies that weren't what they wanted. And like, you know, your loved one was sick. Isn't it going to get better? Oh, finally, we have Star Wars we can uncritically love again. Like, I think that the prequels sort of created the environment for a basically shot-for-shot remake of the first movie to become the biggest movie of all time. If The Force Awakens, the exact movie The Force Awakens, had come out in 1999, it would not be making nearly as much money as it is now.
Oh, I think
Um,
I disagree completely.
Ooh, interesting.
uh, but in terms of, speaking to your question, like, did he help the franchise? Well, in that regard, like, this new movie needed to be a palate cleanser for the fandom. And by making no controversial story choices, although, yes, controversial and highly laudable casting choices, he did exactly that. Like, I almost can't, like, it's almost difficult to me to sort of judge it as a movie because it was so clearly, like, laying the foundation for a cultural product. You know, J.J. Abrams was the perfectly safe choice for you know clearing the air around Star Wars so that then more interesting things can be done with it.
Yeah, I mean, I think. Oh, go ahead, Patrick.
Well, no, I think I and many fans like me are the perfect reason why The Force Awakens is making so much more money than The Phantom Menace. I saw The Phantom Menace once, and I thought, what the fuck was that? Then 2 years later, 3 years later, the Clone Wars came out, and I thought, okay, well, maybe this one would be better. I saw it once. I was like, what the fuck was that? And then 3 years later, I finally saw the last one because I was like, well, this is going to be the last one. What's the worst that can happen? I saw it, and I was like, oh my God, how are you destroying my childhood like this? And then with
Right,
this
you
one,
felt like your
I've
childhood
now
was
seen it.
destroyed, and
So
now you
I'm
got it
not,
back.
no, but here's the thing. I'm not even a fanatic. I mean, it might seem like it on this podcast, but I'm not even a fanatic Star Wars fan, and I've seen it 3 times. I guarantee you there are people that have seen it a dozen times. That's
I
why
know
it's
that. I'm
made
friends with some.
$1.7 billion instead of $800 million, right? It was going to be a big smash anyway, just like all the prequels were going to be big smashes anyway. But just because something's hugely financially successful doesn't mean you maximized your potential. And I think The Force Awakens is maximizing its potential. I think there's so many people that really like it and are really going back to see it 3, 4, 5, and more times because of these little things, because they love the characters. It's not because they love the story, because the story is, like you said, pretty much a retrofit of Star Wars. And even J.J. Abrams came out in an interview like a week and a half ago and said, well, yeah, of course it is. But that's not why people like it. They want because they love Rey. And they love those little Rey moments. And they love that moment where Finn's like laying on the ground after he just got smashed in the head and she says, are you from the Resistance? And like his face does that little change and he's like, well, obviously. And it has that like perfect little character moment. And the movie's full of those moments that we love. And it's perfectly well executed for that. And that's why people like it. And it has all of that. I guess you're calling it charm, and that's fine. I just don't want to trivialize, I think, how difficult it can be
Charm
as a
is
filmmaker
tough. I'm
to
not
introduce that
trivializing
charm.
charm.
Wait, I mean, look at I mean, Natalie Portman and Hayden Christensen and Ewan McGregor, right, are all great actors and clearly had it in them to do more than they did with those original characters. And we can see in the prequels, they had like no charisma, no charm, which was
There's not a single character moment in any of those movies where you're just like, oh, that little facial expression. Oh, that's really cute. Oh, like there's no fuck moment.
what about the
in any
amazing
of those movies.
dialogue where he's like, if you're beautiful, it's only be, or I love you. I don't know. What was it? It was like he said something about like his love. They were doing love back and forth. I wish I had it in front of me, but it's the best dialogue I've ever heard.
Yeah,
It's like,
let's not even get into dialogue, which was always Lucas's weak point. And my favorite moment of the prequels in a favorite kind of way is, where the Jedi are doing all these, like they've already proved they can like jump 6 feet in the air and do all kinds of acrobatics and shit. And then there's a moment where like Anakin is standing like 3 feet higher on a tiny little anthill, and Obi-Wan Kenobi's or no, I think, and sorry, Obi-Wan Kenobi's like standing like 3 foot higher on a little anthill, and he says to Anakin Skywalker, "Is like, I've got the higher ground. It's hopeless. Give up now." I'm just like, what the fuck? These people can practically fly, and this dialogue is about having the higher ground in a lightsaber battle where he's like 3 feet higher. It's so ridiculous.
so AJ, I want to ask you a question that we've kind of keep bringing back, and I really wonder your thoughts because I'm conflicted on this. How acceptable is it in these movies to leave out character development that were promised later? And this, by the way, bringing back to Landis and the Mary Sue, that was one of his big arguments. He said, yeah, maybe Rey's parents are, the theory I like the best is that she's she's related to Ben Kenobi. I like that one the best. There's a lot of stuff in there that seems to indicate that. But how acceptable is it as a story to leave that much detail out? Because obviously even the original Star Wars did, to some degree, unintentionally, right? Lucas didn't know that Luke and Leia were brother-sister. That was added later. If anybody who doesn't think that wasn't retrofitted is fooling themselves. But how acceptable is that to have so much of Rey's backstory, so much of Finn's backstory? I mean, obviously we didn't even get Poe wasn't even a main character, so basically no Poe. How acceptable is that to leave that much out?
I mean, storytelling wise, it's acceptable to do anything you can get away with. I don't think that there's a rule about that. My like, again, like, this is not a case where you can generalize like, oh, the story is failing if it doesn't fit this sort of abstract model. I think that, you know, with regards to Ray, like if you imagine a different kind of story, a story that was sort of offering you different pleasures, like a story that was set entirely on the desert planet that was about, you know, sort of the compromises one makes with oneself and one's conception of self to survive in a environment in a resource poor uh, environment, and like something deep psychological realism where everyone has sort of highly understood motivations and difficult choices they have to make, and then we only ever learned as much about Ray as we learned in this movie. I think that would be a pretty unsatisfying film. Um, but that's sort of not what was on offer here. And I don't think that anyone, like earlier in the pre-show, we were talking about Aaron Sorkin movies and how the dialogue, how everyone is intelligent when they're talking in Aaron Sorkin movies. And with regards to Sports Night, you criticized this, and Dre, and I made the comment that I feel like that's criticizing people for singing in a musical. That's just part of the idiom. That's what's on offer. Um, it's not like Star Wars movies were ever where you went for deep psychological realism. Uh, and also, we know because this is now the seventh feature film, and no one who bought a ticket didn't know it was now purchased by Disney, and the plan was to make at least three more, and then continue to have a Star Wars movie come out for per year till the end of time, as long as they're making money. Yeah, this is at this point you go into Star Wars expecting serialized storytelling. And I think that if there wasn't an expectation of serialized storytelling, the ending and the lack of characterization for Rey would bother people more than they do. But everyone knows they're going to tune in for movie two. And like, you know, and so part of the fun is saying, ooh, what were they, you know, what are they going to come up with for the answers for these questions? I think that sort of the idiom of these movies is understood at this point, that it's no more, you know, like we're no more criticizing the story for not having answered who Rey is than we're criticizing Game of Thrones for not having said who Jon Snow's mom is yet, you know?
Oh,
Yeah, I completely agree. Yeah, and in fact, it's the same when people saw Empire Strikes Back. People knew there was going to be a Return of the Jedi, or they knew there was going to be a third film or whatever. No one was pissed off that at the end of the movie, like Darth Vader was still out there and Luke's hand was still being sewn on, and Han Solo was still in carbonite, and all of these things, right? And in fact, I would argue that people would be more upset if everything was put into this one movie, because people who go to a Star Wars movie want to see serialized epic storytelling. They don't want to see a Law and Order style, like, all in one experience. They don't want to see a space
I
opera of the week, I guess.
I think that's a step too far as well. I basically I think that they would be upset if they pulled it off badly. I've never heard of a case of like a successfully executed story that was complete having people bothered because it was complete.
It's
I
funny,
think that they
actually.
would just kind of feel like it wasn't epic enough.
Yeah,
I
I guess
mean,
I
Star
could see
Wars
your
this one
point.
does have a history of cliffhangers, and so it's right in line with people's expectations. This one sort of ends in a cliffhanger. But like if it ended like with unanswered questions but tying up one main narrative rather than ending in a cliffhanger, it still would have made billions of dollars. People
So,
still would have really loved it.
question to you. I actually thought this, and I realized that this exact moment happened in the Serenity movie. When I watch Star Wars, again, if you're this far, we've spoiled everything. And actually, if we had hit the record button on the podcast, EJ had a pun spoiler that was one of the greatest things ever. Ask me sometime in the future. Maybe I'll tell you what it was. It was hilarious. I regret that we didn't get that on camera. But the end of the movie ends with Rey getting in the Millennium Falcon with Chewbacca, which that's amazing, and flies off. And if you've watched the Serenity movie, basically River ends up in the pilot's seat with Mal Reynolds saying, here's how you got to fly the ship, and it's like the same moment. But of course, this one she flies and she finds Luke, and I didn't think she. I don't. Maybe I'm wrong. Like I definitely enjoyed seeing Mark Hamill in the movie, but I actually, if I would have ended the movie, if I was the editor, I would have actually ended it with her flying off with Chewbacca saying "Let's go," and ended at that moment, not going the extra couple of minutes, and then having the Luke unveil himself with the metal hand and look at her. Although that has created one of the greatest Twitter handles ever, which is like Lonely Luke Skywalker, which is having an epic back and forth battle with like emo Kylo Ren. So I appreciate that, but sorry, that was way long winded, EJ. I was curious your thoughts, or Patrick, either your thoughts on if I'm just being too, nose up in the air there with my preferred ending for the movie. Wow. Like the first silence we've got on the podcast.
I think you finally found a topic neither of us care about that much.
Yeah, I have no opinion.
That's damned impressive, actually. Because, you guys were going back. Like,
I will say, I think both of those Twitter handlers are amazing. I will say that much. But although I think I prefer emo Kylo Ren, but it's close.
Oh, well, one of the things he has there, one of my favorite ones, I'll try and track this down because I don't know how frequently the author, and I believe the author is actually a woman, but I don't know how frequently she tweets. But one of them was like, Ewoks came over tonight and we had to sting Nub Yub 3 times. I didn't ask to be part of this tribe. I hate this family. So that was like the greatest. Like I said, my little thing here is I've been a big Wicket fan forever. When you said 7,
the author of that, because I also love that Twitter feed. The author is known, like the author has been revealed.
Yeah, it was revealed super quick. If you look at, and I apologize. I don't know. I feel bad at this point.
I value authorship.
Yeah, well, if you or Brian want to search really quickly and find it so we can give proper credit where credit's due. But yeah, she was unveiled really quickly, I believe. And we've lost EJ to researching stuff, and I left this open ended. I didn't have a good question going. I'm trying to think.
I'm sure Brian is looking it up. I'll wait to hear what he's saying about it.
I'm trying to think. Patrick, do you remember we had some good stuff pre-show? I think we hit most of it, but I want to make sure. And we, I can go for another 35 minutes, or we can end whenever. But do you recall anything else from the pre-show? Because you said you had some good sound bites. I want to make sure we get on.
Well, I think we've hit most of them. I mean, mostly what we wanted to talk about is the whole Mary Sue thing, and then, the idea of the idea that the Force Awakens is formulaic shouldn't detract from its value as a film. That, I think many films are both formulaic and good. And I guess I kind of think of this very much the way I think, this is going to sound really weird. I think of this a lot like I think about businesses, right? So one of the first things I learned in business school is that a great idea with poor execution is not going to be anywhere near as successful as a mediocre idea with great execution. So I think the Force Awakens was a mediocre idea that was executed perfectly. Or not, maybe not perfectly, but greatly.
Definitely not perfectly, but very well, very well.
Yeah, and I think that great execution is way more important than if they had decided to branch out and do something innovative and new and hadn't executed well on that. Which I think is pretty much exactly what George Lucas did with all of the prequels. He's like, I want to go in a new direction, do something brand new, but then he executed like shit, and so the movies sucked.
Have you seen
I agree with that.
They're the great. I'm jealous. This person makes me feel horrible as a creator, and I forget the YouTube channel. But he made a set of videos called like "What if Episode 1 was really good? What if Episode 2 was really good?" And I'm feeling bad that I can't remember his name. It's a big. I don't know why I'm feeling bad because his YouTube channel and his following is like 10 times ours easily, Patrick, at minimum. Probably more so now that Star Wars came out. But these are great, and it's him taking apart the original prequels and like what he could have done with them. And what I'll actually throw out, this was an idea for a post I almost wrote this week with the firing. So let's bring this back to sports very briefly. The Nets fired their coach and then demoted their GM. And I was considering writing an article called like the George Lucas problem of NBA franchises, because it's very confusing to see someone who's a billionaire that succeeded elsewhere that takes over a team and makes these monumental mistakes. And the theories I've heard on George Lucas are that in the original Star Wars, he was just as batshit in his thoughts as he was in the prequels. If you read the original scripts, he's like, let's talk about, galactic politics because that's exciting, and let's have this horrible dialogue and all this. And he had all of these people, these editors, these special effects people. His
One of
wife
whom was apparently his ex-wife. Yeah.
Yes, his ex-wife is, I think, one of the left out people in history, where she did a lot to help edit that movie. Because I believe one of the stories that I've heard is that when George Lucas screened Star Wars the first time, without a lot of the special effects, without the John Williams soundtrack, without the editing that was put in, everybody thought it was going to fail. Like, even he thought it was going to fail. Notoriously, George Lucas had a bet with Steven Spielberg that Star Wars was going to do worse than, I don't even remember the Spielberg movie. It wasn't one of his big ones. And he lost that bet, and he actually pays Spielberg residuals now because of that bet, because he didn't think Star Wars was going to do well. But once he got to the prequels, no one was around to tell him no. No one was around to say, we need to edit this movie, or there is no reason for this scene where Anakin says, I love you because you're beautiful. And she's like, you're beautiful because I love you because I love you. I'm not that far off from the original dialogue. I hate to say that.
I would argue that came earlier during Return of the Jedi.
Well, yeah, even by the time Return of the Jedi had come out, right? In Empire, he puts a new director and a new writer in. But by Return of the Jedi, right, he's got Indiana Jones, he's got Star Wars. We pointed out last week on the show that he basically took a pay cut on Star Wars to get ownership and merchandising going forward. So by that point, we've already hit the George Lucas has so much money, he doesn't need anybody to tell him what to do or worry if the studio thinks the movie's going to fail. And I think that same thought applies to so many people. Like, we have a billionaire owner of the Nets. We have a billionaire owner of the Kings that are making these monumentally stupid mistakes. And I think it's because there's a disparity. I think it's because you have someone in control who's got billions of dollars and no one can say no to them. And that's why you see stupid decision after stupid decision. And I think that ties back to kind of George Lucas.
I think that most of what George Lucas has said in public kind of confirms that suspicion. Most of what he talks about, like how he doesn't like the direction, well, he kind of hides it, but it's very, if you read between the lines, he's basically saying he thinks the way they took Force Awakens was a terrible idea, and that he was actually, all of the things in the prequels were great ideas, and yeah, no, they weren't.
Which, this speaks to what I was saying before about them being fundamentally different artistic projects. Like, yes, the prequels are terrible. And yes, Lucas has these, well-known limitations, shall we say, as a writer that it's not controversial to remark upon. But to the extent that he's dissatisfied with The Force Awakens, I mean, it does seem to be a different kind of, at least whether the future ones will also be this way or not is yet to be seen, but The Force Awakens is sort of like a palate cleanser. It's like getting back to square one, so you can take the franchise in a new direction.
I think that's
it's a different
Abrams
kind of...
too.
Yeah, I think J.J. Abrams was very intentionally doing it. Like I said, I think he was the perfect person to to wipe the slate clean, because who has a better... Who better productizes nostalgia than J.J. Abrams? No one working today. It's like his great gift. But if you're the person who made the original and you look at this, I think that it is a very different kind of artistic undertaking than anything Lucas did, good or bad. And so, in that respect, I can understand his dissatisfaction.
Well, I think an interesting thing here to remember is that Abrams is, what is he, like in his early 50s, maybe late 40s? I'm not sure how old he is. But if you think about like George Lucas and when he made Star Wars, his heroes were, Kurosawa and the Campbell myths and Flash Gordon, and it was the stuff he grew up with, right? Whereas now, I mean, J.J. Abrams grew up with the 80s. He grew up with Star Wars. He grew up with that stuff. So, I mean, in a very real way, The Force Awakens is fan fiction. It is a like sort of homage to the things that J.J. Abrams grew up with. It's just,
like Super
time
8
has moved on, and Abrams didn't grow up with Flash Gordon. He grew up with Star Wars.
Right.
So
like Super 8 is the best 80s
totally.
science fiction flick ever made 20 years after the 80s.
Yeah, agreed completely. It is completely like saying, hey, what if I went back in time and grabbed Steven Spielberg and brought him to the 2000s and made a movie with him? What would it look like? And it's like, well, it would probably look like Super 8.
Okay, well and by the way, we've been going over an hour. I think I'm good on everything I needed to say, but we can obviously open up. So I'll go back and forth. I'll let Patrick, you get one closing thought on Star Wars. We'll see where that goes. Then I'll let EJ, you get one closing thought. We'll see where that goes. I got to do my monologue. I got to do my little piece on George Lucas that now means that I probably won't write that article, Patrick, because I said it on air. But and I've got a few other ideas maybe this week, but this should be enough. But all right, so Patrick, I know I this is me and I put you in the leadoff spot. Last thought on Star Wars.
Okay, so I don't know. I have no idea if anything about this has been written online, but if I were the writer, then for me, Rey would be Ren's twin sister, and the reason they don't know about each other is because when Leia and Han were like when Ren was like Ben at the time was a teenager, they're like, this dude's a dick. We need to get him away from his sister so that she's not corrupted by the dark side. So they dumped her on some desert planet in order to protect her from Ben and the dark side, and so she's actually his sister.
Yeah, because that's what you do when you have one special needs child, is you take your non-special needs child and dump them on a desert planet.
You give one to Chewbacca for raising, and
well, I mean, an easy. I hope narratively, and man, see, you're going to get us going. And this is, I will find, like, I've had friends where we've just discussed this exact thought, like, what is Rey's backstory, which has been a lot of fun. An easy thing there is she's sent off, like she's supposed to be sent off somewhere safe, and something happens along the way. So she was supposed to have a guardian or a person, and she ends up on the planet not unintentionally, and the person was intending to come back, and something else happened.
Yeah,
that's easy enough.
Yeah, and my clue here is that, and towards the end of the movie, when she comes back from Starkiller Base, Leia hugs her, even though they have never met, which is kind of weird, right? Like just randomly hugging somebody you never met. It's kind of weird, unless she's your secret long lost daughter. Just saying.
You don't
I can't think of a circumstance in which I've hugged someone I just met when they weren't my secret long lost daughter.
So, you keep more on the DL, is what you're saying there. All right. Well, yeah.
I've been meaning to share this with you for a long time. I was waiting until I made it to Wisconsin, but you're my long lost daughter.
I don't think the age is even okay. Anyway, all right. So, EJ, last thought.
I mean, I think I already sort of said what I have to say. We didn't talk a lot about the Arnita Sarkeesian interview. I think there's a lot of good stuff in it. I think there's a lot of sort of conceptually really poor writing in Star Wars: The Force Awakens that is mostly like glossed over by the fact that it's a very glitzy, fun movie. I enjoyed seeing it. It would probably only barely make my top 10 movies of 2015, but I enjoyed it a lot. I thought it was better than Jurassic World. But
I feel bad because I enjoyed Jurassic. Like I was able to turn off my brain watching that movie. So that's a movie where I could go through with a trope comb or even a non-trope comb and just point out everything wrong with that movie. But I watched it and I enjoyed it. And it's one of those weird things where I'm like, I know this is not good, but I was able to watch it.
Oh, yeah, I say that I didn't hate Jurassic World. I wouldn't call it good. And I also wouldn't call Star Wars The Force Awakens good. But Star Wars The Force Awakens is in a cultural position where, like, is it a good movie is, like, almost not a relevant question. The question is, like, did it do its job to, like, sort of recapture the magic of being a cultural touchstone that was tarnished by the first three prequels? Or by the first three prequels, the three prequels. And yeah, it did exactly what it was supposed to in that regard, and is going to be duly rewarded by being the most successful movie of all time. And like, sort of the interesting artistic questions are all about where they go from here.
What I will say, what's interesting about your point, and this, I think this group of people shows kind of a perfect thing, because Patrick and I've kind of mentioned we grew up on this. 25 sounds about right, Patrick. I think I was a little older, but at that point I started, you find other movies and you realize, an interesting thing for me is The Matrix and the prequels came out at the same time. And so you see The Matrix and you're like, oh my God, this is what science fiction can be in movies. And EJ, that's probably going to make you sad because, like, I've got to imagine that The Matrix.
Oh, I love The Matrix.
Okay, good. I was going to say, because all the stuff it's based off of, I would imagine it's not even as good. But
no,
I saw The Matrix.
Is a brilliant movie.
And yeah, so I love The Matrix, and then I saw the prequels, and I'm like, oh, I'm going to go over there now. I'm like, thanks, Star Wars, enjoyed you, but...
I mean, I would honestly say that, like, there are certain... You can sort of draw a line in terms of the kind of special role of science fiction cinema in particular of, like, widening the possible visual landscape. And, like, you can sort of draw a line from, like, Forbidden Planet through 2001: A Space Odyssey, through Star Wars, through The Matrix. And I would say that line would continue up to something like, say, like Alfonso Cuarón's Gravity, where he was doing things that like visually that sort of expanded the realm of the possible within. So like one of the like sort of just historically relevant tasks of science fiction cinema is to like create new ways of showing things on a screen that hadn't been done before. And both Star Wars and The Matrix are like peaks in that tradition.
Awesome. But what I'll say there is one of the comparisons is New Coke. And Gladwell talked a lot about this in the book Blink, where we have these split-second decisions that we put a lot of faith in. And sometimes they're right and sometimes they're wrong. And one of the things we leave out a lot is context matters. So a good example is I could take you to a very fancy dinner at an amazing, I don't even know what type of food you like or whatever, but a fancy, amazing dinner. And if I take you to a McDonald's restaurant and put that in, Chinese takeout container boxes and put it on a paper plate, even if it's from a 5-star restaurant, your experience of that meal will not be as good as if we actually eat it at the 5-star restaurant with a maitre d' and a wine list and all that jazz. And so I think people leave out how important kind of the environment that we enjoy something in matters for that. And what I'd say is Star Wars, that was something that George Lucas kind of left out, is it's like you are allowed to try new stuff, but you have to couch it in this environment that all of these people grew up and loved. It's like you don't serve, like I said, you don't serve a 5-star meal in a McDonald's and go, why didn't everybody like it? And so I feel J.J. Abrams, and I think we've gone back and forth. I'm going to listen to this and I'm going to realize that we basically were all just running around this central thesis where we all had different thoughts, but it all was basically the same thing, where it's like, that's what J.J. Abrams did. He said, I need to serve this Star Wars in a Star Wars box, in a Star Wars restaurant, and I can add new things that he did that are good. And that's why people like it. And that's why people who maybe weren't as huge on Star Wars look and go, well, it's good. It's just not the most amazing thing ever, because it doesn't remind you of your childhood eating at the Star Wars restaurant. That's a really weird metaphor.
Well, yeah, I mean, basically you're making comments about like, the context in which we receive art and psychological priming, and I agree with all of them. Like if Star Wars didn't exist and the original Star Wars didn't exist, if there wasn't this tradition, and I saw Star Wars: The Force Awakens, I would think that it was a bad movie. But that's not that's not a valid way to receive it. It's not free of context, and that's why I said like all of the sort of interesting artistic choices. This film did, like, the artistic aim of this film was like not even focused internally. It was sort of an externally focused artistic goal, which is to sort of renew renew the appetite for Star Wars in a tone that it once existed but now has not existed after the first 3 movies. To like set the stage in which stories can be told that people will be excited about in a certain way. And it did that brilliantly. Was its goal to like sort of be internally consistent and make sense and like hang together well as a unitary piece of cinema? No, that wasn't the goal. And so judging it on that goal almost feels like churlish. It feels like it's tempting to do because that's what we normally do with movies, but this is just a different kind of project.
Love it. I think that sums everything up. All right. I didn't ask any of you pre-show if you have shout outs. I have one that's really unrelated to this, but if either of you, this is the classic shout someone out at the end of the podcast. Patrick, do you happen to have anybody? Did we lose Patrick?
No, you didn't lose me. I just I've been thinking about Star Wars too much. I guess I don't have anybody.
I'll steal and throw just in the dead air, like Oscar Isaac Hernandez, just, oh my God, having, ethnic people in movies that, he's not Mexican, so that's fine. I guess it's Guatemalan and Cuban, but I love having characters like that in movies that aren't like thieves. Like just having, I wish I'd had him as a kid. So sorry, go ahead.
What I will say about Oscar Isaac is he was one of the stars of my favorite movie of 2015, Ex Machina.
I still haven't seen that, and I feel bad about that.
Ex Machina is amazing. I think it's one of the best science fiction movies I've ever seen.
Yeah.
All right, well, I'll make sure to check that out before we talk next. Any shout-outs out of you, EJ?
You know what? I'm going to, just because we're talking about science fiction and cinema, and I just mentioned Ex Machina, I'm going to shout out Alex Garland, who he wrote, and it was his directorial debut with Ex Machina. He wrote 28 Days Later. He wrote the script for Dredd, which was twice as clever as it had any right to be. I really liked Dredd a lot. And I think that he sort of just steals for the 2010s so far the mantle of the most important science fiction screenwriter working right now. His next project is going to be Annihilation, a sort of loose adaptation of Jeff Vandermeer's Area X trilogy. Um, and uh, and yeah, he's like, I think the only person who's even in competition for like greatest contributions to science fiction cinema is Christopher Nolan. But I think I'd put Alex Garland ahead for this decade so far.
Isn't he tied to a movie that's coming out this year? I
Is
want to
that
say that there's a big movie
not
coming out
Annihilation?
this year. No.
Annihilation is 2017.
Oh, I can jump in here, guys. I haven't talked yet, but he did write the original screenplay for Halo. That's the other upcoming movie aside from Annihilation that he's got in his IMDb queue anyway.
Hmm.
There you go.
All right.
Yeah. So Alex Garland,
Yeah.
you're a name that attracts me to movies now.
That is awesome. Well, you were much more prepared. Mine is 48 Productions, which is a YouTube channel that does a lot of walkthroughs for. Oh, do you actually know what I'm talking about? Because
I do. That's the nerdiest damn thing I've ever clicked through from your Twitter feed. But I watched the entire video and then a couple others.
So I've been replaying Final Fantasy VII, and this person may be a genius or may have wasted the most amount of time in their life. And so for any of you that are Final Fantasy VII fans, if this rings true to you, you are able to defeat the Ruby weapon, which is the hardest boss in the game, with 5 unleveled materia. That blew my mind. I've wasted my life on sports stats. I should have been doing that. But this person, it's 4A Production.
You have a level 99 character.
No, I did it with a level 72.
Huh. Oh, your hit points have to be above a certain somewhere in the high.
You do. I did use some other, so I did have like an HP plus. But yes, if you can with a mid 70s character single-handedly defeat the hardest boss in Final Fantasy VII with 5 unleveled materias.
Actually, exclusively single-handedly. If your other characters are alive, it doesn't work.
And sorry to keep this, EJ, you are encouraging me too much. I kept it going. I added my own flavor. We've been talking about like stealing other people's ideas and then adding your own flourish as an author. I added a Phoenix summon to that combo, so I was actually able to revive my other characters, beat the boss with all 3 of my characters, and get all of the AP XP for all 3 characters in my party from this video. So it was one of the most amazing things I've seen. And wow, I'm impressed that I was able to take an already geeky podcast and it on the geekiest level ever.
Hey, can I do a shout out after all?
Oh yes, let's do it.
So the shout out I actually like to do, because we were talking about how like, George Lucas wanted to do like politics and all that crazy quote unquote boring stuff in sci-fi, and it didn't work out in the prequels. And I wanted to give a shout out to a show on sci-fi called The Expanse, which in my opinion actually does all that stuff brilliantly. It does like politics. It does like what would race relations look like in a sort of a post-human future. And I think it's on episode 5 or 6 now, and it was just recently renewed for season 2. And it's this amazing like epic kind of solar system spanning science fiction show that I think if you loved like Battlestar Galactica, the new one, and if you liked it, I guess it's kind of an evolution of. I'd like to think of it this way: like if you like in Alien, like what would like the politics and the corporations of like the evil corporation and Alien have all looked like? Not the alien battles themselves or the fights with the alien monsters, but like what would that universe have looked like? What would the corporations and the politics and all that stuff, what would it have looked like? I think The Expanse would be a perfect thing to do. And it has plenty of like adventure stuff too, but it's mostly like, politics and really sort of post-human exploration of what life would be like in a solar system where there's no like faster than life travel, right? So like, traveling to Jupiter is a huge deal, but you can't travel to Andromeda. And it's a really, really good story. And
those are based on a series of novels by James S.A. Corey, which is actually a pseudonym for 2 authors, whose names are now shamefully escaping me.
Daniel Abraham is one of them.
Daniel Abraham is one, and who's the other? Daniel Abraham is the one I can usually remember, but I can't remember the other.
Yeah, that's right.
Daniel Abraham also had a good series of fantasy books.
Yeah, I can't remember the other one either. But the books are amazing, and the story, the show is very true to the books, and even though they change very key details, it still remains true to the spirit of the books. And another thing that I think all of the three of us would especially
And
like
they're
is
in the writer room, by the way. They're very involved in the production. The authors of
there's
the
a
books.
ton of great biodiversity in the I don't know why I said biodiversity, ethnic diversity in the movies. Like, like the main characters, there's an Indian
There are
female and there's
fungi,
a black
beetles,
female, and
Foam under the entire show.
what's that?
There are fungi and beetles and epiphytes all through
Yeah.
such biodiversity.
No, but the characters are great. I mean, I don't think she's going to become very prominent until season 2. Spoiler alert! But one of the there's an older Indian woman that's great because she breaks ethnic barriers, she breaks sexist barriers, she breaks ageist barriers, and it's just a great show. And it's very dense. You got to pay attention from the get go.
That's going to make it hard because usually I'm writing articles of top 10 box scores while I have things in the background. So anyway.
Yes. So let's talk about this one-line box score centric bias that you have in your articles that punishes the Spurs, Dre.
Okay, so sorry. We'll kind of bring ourselves down. I always end the show with a plug for this anyway, so this is an odd show to plug it on, but I do a weekly column called the Top 10 Box Scores of the Week, and to be clear, these are kind of ones that I either remember because they were memorable to me, or they're my favorite, or they fit under a certain category, like triple doubles from Draymond Green are just easy. So if you see those, comment in the comment section if you see any box scores, basketball preferably, but if you have biodiversity ones, if there's a tree race that I should have a box score from, feel free to add that as well. And EJ is a Spurs fan, which we didn't even discuss at all on the show. And
I marvel at my restraint.
And I have gone out of my way the last couple of weeks to make sure a Spur makes the list, but it is always it's a bench player. It's been a bench player from the Spurs the last 2 weeks. It's not my fault. Tell Kawhi and Tim Duncan to pick it up if they want to make my list.
Just individual player bias cuts against the sort of team dynamic that the Spurs have, Trey.
Even though
it's a structural error.
Kawhi is the best player in the NBA outside of Steph Curry right now. It's absurd. All right, anyway, that is our Star Wars show that ended on Final Fantasy VII Expanse Spurs. All right, if you found us not through the site, we are on boxscoregeeks.com. Our guests have been EJ Fischer, who you can find on Twitter as Glorious Hubris, and at his site, Eugene Fisher, that has a C in it, .com. Co-host Patrick Minton, you can find him on Twitter as NBA Geek. Produced by the restrained Brian Foster, who you can find on Twitter as Boxscore Brian. Our show is on iTunes and Stitcher as the Boxscore Geeks Show. We go live every week, twitch.tv/nerd numbers. You have to follow us on Twitter to find out when, because it works around the author's schedules, and we're busy people. We don't always have time to go at the same time. And then we have reruns on YouTube, channel Nerd Numbers. I already gave a shout out for the top 10 box scores of the week. So that's been our show. And we will see you probably more Spurs related than Star Wars related next week. Talk to you then.